Get started. We have a quorum. This is the Planning and Oversight Committee meeting for October 1. Before we start with our roll call, Scott has an announcement.
Okay, everybody, so you may feel like the acoustics are a little different in here today. I want you to take a notice of this big disc that's up here at the ceiling.
Spaceship.
That is a microphone. And it is a very sensitive microphone. Did you guys hear that? Richard has an unshirt. Okay, so you're getting my point? Whispers, communication between you all will be picked up, will be live streamed, and will be heard in the back. So, please be judicious in how you make comments. Also, for those of you who are need a little extra help hearing, this system is now linked into hearing devices that we can give you. And not to out Miss Andrea, but she is helping us test it out today. And so what feeds through our systems will actually feed through those hearing devices. That's all part of our equity and action planning process. I feel like we're getting a little feedback. But if you could just bear with us as we kind of tune this a little bit. But it's pretty exciting for us to kind of get the sound back to the people in the back and at home so that everybody can hear what's going on. So.
Excellent, thank you. Roll
I
call.
took off the other hearing aid. Maybe that was given feedback.
Thank you.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Arnold,
I'm here.
Mr. Albright,
Here.
Ms. Banks, Ms. Bell. Here. Mr. Brown, Ms. Carter. Here. Ms. Clark. Dr. Elhai. Here. Ms. Friedman. Reverend Gordon.
Here.
Ms. Harding. Here. Ms. Howe. Ms. Mendoza-Locke. Here. Ms. Rodriguez. Dr. Sada.
Here.
Major White. Here. Ms. White.
Thank you. Let's recognize our visitors, starting with Richard in the back row. Thank you. Welcome to all of you. Our next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the September 3 meeting. Are there any additions or corrections? Entertain a motion to approve them.
Second.
We have a motion and second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Any abstention? Motion carries. The meeting minutes from September 3 are approved. Treasurer's report, Jenny.
Treasurer's report, the financial statements are on page 8. These are the final reports for fiscal year 24, which ended in June. So I will have the next fiscal year starting next month, but this, I mentioned last month that I was gonna keep it an extra month open to get the POS increase that we talked about last month. So that is all included in here. These are the final financial statements for last fiscal year. So on page 8, like I normally do, I'm gonna run through the variances that we have for the full fiscal year. For our local levy revenue, we actually were only 38,000 difference on a $18.6 million budget, so that's actually pretty impressive. In federal revenue, consistent with what I've been saying throughout the last fiscal year, we had a variance there mostly due to the state opioid and stimulant response and the ARPA 2 federal grants from Ohio Moss. And the state opioid and stimulant response actually continues, well, it ended yesterday, last week. And then the ARPA 2 funds, Ohio Moss actually allowed us to continue those funds into this fiscal year. So we had underspending last year, but it actually, we didn't have to give the money back. And then in the state revenue, we were under budget there because of the access to wellness funds. And the state actually allowed us to carry over some of those funds as well. So then if you look down in the grant funded program expenses line, a lot of that underspending, variance between budget is due to the same things that I said in revenue, so the SOS and the ARPA 2 grant along with access to wellness. We had about $645,000 of agency underspending, but $300,000 of that was due to Squawk and Belief Center, and both of those programs were getting up and running for their new programs. So we actually had very little underspending for our agency programs in comparison to years previous. And then overall for the fiscal year, if you look at the second column there, we had a decrease in net assets of $4.4 million for the year. If you look at the balance sheet on page 9, the next page, the decrease, so this is for May and June. There was a $4.6 million decrease in cash, and most of that was due to our May grant payment, along with us trying to push out some payments at the end of the fiscal year. And then you'll notice we also had significant adjustments in May and June, and that would just be our accruals for accounts payable and accounts receivable at the year. And then our non-designated board fund balance decreased to $13.2 million at year end. And there are payments for May and June on pages 10 through 15, so quite a bit there, 5 pages worth. And there is a motion on page 7.
Are there any questions for Jenny? It's a lot to digest. We've got 2 months worth of financials and year end. So make sure you understand it before we move on. Is the underspending that we did have roughly in line with what you predicted?
It was pretty close to our previous financial forecast, yes. We were not terribly far off of our forecast, yes. You'll see the next actual write-up is our updated forecast.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions, comments? There's a motion at the top of page 7.
So moved. Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? Motion carries. Jenny, keep rolling.
Okay, so the financial forecast, the actual numbers for it, the write-up for it is on page 16. The actual numbers for it are on page 17. So I'm gonna go through some of the highlights for it, and then I'm gonna go back and circle big picture for the financial forecast. So if you look at page 17, the table there, I know it's kind of small and hard to see, but please bear with me. The first column there is actual fiscal year 24. So that's what you just saw in the financial statements. So the revenue and the expenses that you just saw. And then you'll see an ending fund balance there of $14.5 million. So that includes our 1.3 million board designated along with our 13.2 million undesignated that I just mentioned. Then we have projected fiscal years 25, which is our current fiscal year that we're in right now, through fiscal years 29. So then if in the revenue section I'll just kind of go down through the line. In the federal grants, you can see that we go from fiscal year 24, last fiscal year, we were at 6.4 million. In fiscal year 25, we're projecting to be at 4.5, and then we drop down to 2.2 for the remainder of the projection. And that is mostly due to the state opioid and stimulant response grant. So we mentioned last month that the 4.0 grant was out. We put in an application for it, but we haven't received word back on yet what our award will be. So I did not include anything in their revenue or expense for that at this point. Revenue should offset expense whenever we get it. So not being in there doesn't affect the bottom line of the financials at all. So you'll see though that that's a significant decrease when you look at the revenue line, but it's also going to be a significant decrease when you look at the expense line. On the state funds, the variance there when you go from one year to the next is basically just, we had carryover funds or some one-time funds that we're thinking in fiscal year 25 that we wouldn't anticipate going forward. On the local levy funds, so this is the main highlight in the revenue section. So in fiscal year 24, we brought in 18.6 million. Then in fiscal year 25, we're projecting it to be 21.2 million. And then in fiscal year 26 and beyond, we're projecting it at 23.985 million. And that is because we're bringing in the new levy funds that we just passed. So the new collection for it begins in March. So it's gonna be half of fiscal year 25 and then full year in fiscal year 26 of the new levy collection. And then in the other income, there you see a pretty significant decrease there from fiscal year 25 to fiscal year 26. And that is mostly City of Toledo, ARPA funds, and Danny's Place are hitting that line. So City of Toledo ARPA funds, we have $1 million in there for fiscal year 25, and Danny's Place, we have $9 million approximately. And that make up that $10 million in fiscal year 25. So that's the revenue section. For the expenses, it's pretty consistent with what I talked about in the revenue. I will also point out that we did include additional expenses related to our levy passing. So we talked about when we were passing the levy that we wanted to do something additional with youth, young adults, and treatment in the jail. So that's included in the forecast as well. That is $250,000 in fiscal year 25, and then we have it at $2 million starting in fiscal year 26 and beyond in the forecast. And that is hitting the grant funded programs line. And then I also wanted to highlight the POS line, so that's our treatment line, agency non-Medicaid POS. We have an increase of approximately $1 million in there in fiscal year 25. And that includes a 12% increase in allocations to account for the Medicaid match increase. And then I also, in board administration, wanted to point out $1 million in fiscal year 26 for the infrastructure transformation project, phases 3 and 4. You had a presentation on that a couple months ago about approximately how much that would cost and what that would entail. So I'm gonna stop there and ask if anybody has any questions on that before I talk big picture. Okay. Yes.
Treatment at the jail, what is that?
Treatment at the jail is when we passed our levy, we agreed that we would help offset some of the costs of Vital Core at the jail.
Okay, so if you look at the forecast in total, so if you look at fiscal year 24, the ending fund balance is $14.5 million. That's where we currently were at the end of June. In fiscal year 25, that's where we are right now. That's the fiscal year we're currently in. Our minimum fund balance is $8.9 million. So at that point, we would either need to increase revenue or decrease expenses. So if you look at taking the ending fund balance, you add your revenue, you subtract your expenses, you get the ending fund balance the next year. If you look at it's the bottom line there on each of the fiscal years. When you get to fiscal year 28, we are below our minimum fund balance. So prior to that, we would either need to increase revenue or decrease expenses. And given that we just passed a levy, we have had numerous discussions internally about decreasing expenses, and our intention is to decrease by approximately $500,000 in fiscal year 26, and then some additional in fiscal year 27 to help us bring our ending projection number above our minimum fund balance. That is obviously not reflected here because we don't know what those reductions are going to be yet, but we do know that we will have to make reductions in order to make this balanced. So I am open to any other questions that anyone might have.
Any other questions for Jenny? This is information,
Correct.
so there's nothing to vote on, but we need to make sure we understand it completely because it's really important.
I do have a question.
last meeting, we talked about the funds that, we're gonna need to reimburse the providers because they're treating more people. Yeah. So that looks like it's a static amount going forward.
Yes, so the amount that had already been incurred, so the agencies had already provided the services in fiscal year '24. That budget was increased in fiscal year '24 and those expenses were incurred in fiscal year '24. So you see that reflected in the '24 line.
Okay.
That's why that is $5 million there. In fiscal year '25, we went back to what their original allocation was and we increased it by about $1 million. And that mostly is to account for, we've talked to you previously that the Medicaid rates increased by about 12% in January of 2024. We never actually increased the agency allocations by that amount.
I see, okay.
So we increased our forecast to account for that because we assume at some point they're going to need more funds and it's only reasonable that we would have at least that. So that is still to be determined, additional beyond that $1 million that we have in there. Obviously, I think our forecast can't handle it without additional reduction somewhere else.
Right.
But it is included in there.
Okay, so $1 million of those funds we've already projected for,
Correct.
but it could turn out to be higher.
If we wanted it to be, but that's becomes a conversation about priorities.
Okay.
Yeah, there's conversations happening. We are meeting with the agencies to discuss how we better manage our purchase of service spending growth.
Right.
We know that there's increased services happening, more people are receiving treatment services. We expect that to continue. And as you can see in the forecast, what can we do to assure that people coming into our system get services, but we maintain, our financial health
Right, yeah.
as well. So there's gotta be some discussions
Right.
about what we actually do to, maybe it's benefit limits, maybe it's a different payment methodology. Who knows what that might look like.
But that's being worked on,
We're-
and
we're-
thought about. Okay, all right, thank you.
Jenny, I'm sorry, you keep saying there's $1 million added to the POS line. It looks like 500,000 to me.
Right, because
Was
it's
there
a,
already 500 in '24?
correct,
Okay.
because of that additional that we brought you last month.
Okay.
Yes.
That was my question.
Yes.
Yeah, she's been anticipating almost all of my questions so far, so. All right,
There's another question.
I'm sorry,
May I ask
Doctor, go ahead.
What is the minimum fund balance amount?
Our annual, or our total is 8.9 million. So
Should
we
not, should
can't,
not go below 8.
correct, we can't go below 8.9.
And that's added, included in which line in the revenue of the next year?
So that's just our fund balance, so the revenue minus expenses is
Okay,
where
so-
we would sit.
So it's not added to the next year, we just keep it aside, not included in the revenue section.
Think of it like equity. Like if you think about financial statements, your revenue minus your expenses becomes your equity. That's what our fund balance is. Our minimum required in order to pay our bills going forward is 8.9 million. So we don't allow ourselves to go below that 8.9 million because then we can't pay our bills going forward.
And that was established several years ago based on 120 days of program expenses, which is tied to Ohio Revised Code, 120-day notice requirements if things really went bad.
Thank you.
So it's not just an arbitrary number, it's a number that was thought out that has a specific purpose behind it. Okay, any other questions for Jenny before we move on? All right, Lucas County calendar year budget.
Okay, that's on page 19. So this is a kind of switching gears because this is based on a calendar year and this is a budget. So the Lucas County Auditor's Office processes our payments. So we are part of their system. We have to set a budget with the county and the commissioners approve our budget, our annual budget. So this is our county calendar year 2025 budget. So this will be our budget from January through December of next year. So if you look at page 19, the first column there is what our final was for calendar year 23. The next column is current year through the end of August. And then the next column is what our approved budget was for current year. And then the fourth column is what we are taking to you for approval, and then we'll be taking to the county commissioners for approval. And then we have variance there for our current year versus the budget. So I'm gonna quickly kind of go through some of the variance amounts to explain the variances. In the operating revenues line, that is just to account for the new levy revenue, so that's why it's a significant increase. In the intergovernmental revenue, the significant decrease there is to account for Danny's Place and City of Toledo ARPA funds. Because we anticipate most of that being in calendar year 24 and the very beginning of calendar year 25. And then in the expenses section, I'm gonna jump all the way down to charges and services. So this is pretty difficult to predict because we start with our forecast that I just had for you, but it's only gonna be half of that, and then the other half is basically the beginning of fiscal year 26. So we kind of go from there and we factor in, we have in there some increases maybe for some Danny's Place expenses that we think will linger. We also have the increases in the levy priority projects that are gonna be continuing. So that's why you see the $1.876 million increase in charges and services line. Then some of the variances in materials and supplies and miscellaneous expenditures and capital outlay, most of those offset each other, and that's just us trying to more accurately reflect where the expenses belong. So it may be food for a training, so we may have hit training, we may have hit food in the past. So we're trying to just be a little bit more consistent about where we put that and have our budget reflect that. And then I just wanted to also point out that in general, we're seeing a decrease in the capital outlay line and more under charges and services because of our ITP project. So like for example, the Zoom that we used to have would have fallen under capital outlay because it was an equipment software. But now we don't have Zoom and we have other systems that are an equipment lease, which falls under charges and services. So you see a little bit of variance there and why charges and services were going up and some of the other areas were going down. So I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has on that. There is a motion for this one and that is on page 18.
Any questions for Jack about the complicated process of translating a fiscal year to a calendar year?
The capital outlay, again, can you explain that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's not necessarily just capital, it could be capital, so like previously we purchased physical computers, now we're leasing computers under our ITP project. So we don't necessarily need a budget under capital, it's going to be under charges and services, which is like contracts, because it's a contract to lease it. And the software lease would fall under there. So a lot of our ITP projects, we're seeing a shift in where those costs are. So that's why you see a shift in some of the expense lines.
Did I miss materials and supplies?
Yes, so that one is basically offset almost completely with miscellaneous expenditures and capital outlay. And that is because under materials and supplies is where training falls and food. So when I mentioned the comment about training, like we might have had food for a training and does it fall under training or does it fall under food? We're just trying to better align that.
Any other questions? Comments? Is there a motion? It's on in the middle of page 18, motion to approve this and submit it to the commission.
Second.
Motion and a second.
Over here.
You have a question?
No, I'll second.
Oh, okay. We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
I think we need to thank Jenny and her team.
Great job. The team,
The team.
the team.
It took a lot of hours, a lot of people hours to get to this point. This is not easy stuff. This is, you know, it's why we employ a CPA to do this work. And experienced folks, so good work, thank you.
All right, from the numbers to the programs, Elijah, let's talk about the landlord incentive program.
Okay, so we're on page 20 here. The landlord incentive program was funding we received from the state for fiscal year 24 and 25. This money is to allow agencies to provide an incentive to landlords to rent to clients who may be hard to rent to. Clients have to either have a criminal record, with a mental health or substance use diagnosis, or being discharged from a psychiatric hospital. The agencies can provide up to $2,000 per client just to do an incentive. So this is an ongoing rent. Clients need to have a viable source to pay for it. It's not group home, money for group home. This is a standard tenant lease, but it's really to give agencies some ability to negotiate with landlords. We carried over the funding into this fiscal year, and we are anticipating additional money later in the fiscal year. The state wants us to utilize this before they give us another allocation. So we're carrying over the $37,000, and then what's different in this motion than the previous one a few months ago is that we're creating a pool of funding for all the agencies that we contract with who want to be a part of this. Previously, we contracted with Task and Unison, but we decided that all of our treatment agencies really help with housing, and they might want to access this money to kind of incentivize landlords. So that's what we're voting on today in the motion, to continue that pool and open it up to the other agencies and using this money that we already have.
So any agency that have not utilized it in the past can do so now. Is that the intent?
Yes, yeah. We haven't had any agency utilize it yet because this funding came at a very weird time. It was like at the end of the fiscal year. So by the time we got it to the board, contracts out, we actually had an agency look at the contract in the new fiscal year and said, do we have to sign this because the fiscal year was over? So yes, we're opening it up to really any of the agencies we contract with.
But do you have any projection as to which agencies may or may not?
Yeah, we're currently in communication with them, so I think we're anticipating at least 2 more be part of this.
And we're talking treatment agencies.
Yeah, treatment
agencies.
Treatment agencies and St. Paul's.
And this is carryover money?
Yes.
Yeah.
So does this motion in any way impact the motion that we previously moved and adopted?
Yes, because we're opening it up to more agencies. Previously, it was just the 2.
Okay. So this motion is adequate to, I guess, modify or amend our prior motion.
Yes.
Motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adopt the proposed motion in the middle of page 20. Is there any further discussion about that? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. All right, Elijah, the recovery housing program.
So still on page 20, this is, again, money we received from the state. We looked at this back in May of 24, so last fiscal year, and it's money to pay for recovery housing. So those recovery houses have to be certified recovery houses, either level 1, 2, or 3 with the National Alliance for Recovery Residences, or certified through the Ohio Recovery Housing or chartered through the Oxford House. We received this funding for, again, both fiscal years, and the state, we looked at their budget and decided to give us more money. So you'll see that we have an increased amount in here, but I will note that the total allocation is actually $905,393.50. So there was an error on with the calculations, and it's $3 less than what's printed. So this motion on the next page, so page 21, is really to accept this full amount and create a pool of funds where, again, the agencies we contract with who operate recovery housing can draw down to pay for the recovery housing for eligible clients. We're not allocating it per agency because some agencies might have more openings than other ones. So we're trying to utilize the full amount for each one who can.
So this is only for agencies that you're currently doing offering services?
Yeah, so the agencies we have a provider agreement with, or we've had a SOS agreement with a state opioid and stimulus response grant.
Yeah, Linda.
Is there sober living houses that different agencies have?
These are recovery housing. So like Zest Recovery Housing, another one we funded through SOS would be T. Whitehead Recovery Housing.
Which agencies?
So Zeph, Harbor, T. Whitehead, Ohio Guidestone.
Team Recovery?
Any other questions? Does this motion represent a change in the program? I mean, is this simply a continuation of the way we've been doing it?
Yes, it's a continuation and accepting the additional.
The additional $44,000.
Just curious, does it cover the whole rent or client pays part or it's flexible? How does that work?
This will cover the full rent for up to 2 years.
For 2 years?
Any further questions, comments? The motion at the top of page 21,
I move with the amendment as stated.
change the $3, yeah.
Second.
We have a motion and second to approve the motion that's printed at the top of page 21 with the correction that the actual amount is $905,393.50. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries.
So continue on the health officer designation.
Yep, go ahead.
We have 6 new health officers and 1 renewal this month. So you'll see that motion towards the bottom.
Is there any discussion, any questions about these health officers? Bunch of new ones.
The top ones are new.
Yes.
There's a typo.
It says
Yeah,
renewal.
that's, I think that's what he said, yeah.
It says
The
renewal.
top's new and
Yeah. So we have 6 new ones and 1 renewal, right? Math is, if I have enough fingers to count.
Yes.
Any questions, comments? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed, any abstentions, motion carries. All right, out of county forensic monitoring contract. This is a little complicated for me, so Elijah, take it away.
Yeah, so this will be the first time any of you see something like this. We have a Lucas County resident who is in Franklin County who is on forensic monitoring. Boards will sometimes do this when the client may not be safe in that community or they need to put them somewhere else. They'll have a board-to-board agreement which outlines who's providing services, treatment services, and who's providing forensic monitoring. This client is well known to our system, so the details about it are intentionally vague to protect this person's identity. But this is about the Franklin County Board providing forensic monitoring services and treatment services and authorizing potential payments for those up to $10,000.
Nice. So this is for one person in particular that we're talking about?
Yes.
This motion? And so is there a bigger picture? Like, is this something that happens often? Is it just with big cities like this, or is this like the first time?
This is
you
the second
experienced
time since I've been here, almost
Oh, wow.
14 years, that we've had to do something like this. And usually, usually what happens is it's a fairly well-known criminal offense by somebody who was in our system that ended up in a state hospital somewhere other than NOBH. And they've been there a significant length of time. And because of the notoriety of the offense, there's a belief that the individual would not be safe to be released back into our community. And so there's a plan that is developed for that person to stay in Franklin County. While we have these very unique agreements, it is rare, but they do happen routinely across the 88 counties in Ohio. But this is just one of those unique situations.
So is it safe to say that the individual would have been in our system first?
Okay, yeah, thank you for that, because Ohio residency requirements in our system don't allow you to change the county of residence due to a court case or a placement in an out-of-county group home or hospital. So let's say somebody from Hancock County gets placed in a group home in Lucas County, they remain a Hancock County resident for the purposes of our system. Until they say, I wanna stay here, or there's compelling evidence to suggest that they are going. It's just these reciprocal agreements that happen all the time. Many times they're just notifications, but in this case, because the person had been in the hospital for a very long time and will likely need additional non-Medicaid type treatment or support services, Franklin County wanted a contract.
So this person is ours.
This person is absolutely ours, yes.
Did we participate in the planning that came up with the $10,000 number?
So that was a request and that seems reasonable. There isn't a plan for how that 10,000 would be spent, so to speak. It's a plug number, knowing that when this person gets out, there's gonna be some needs there.
So they need more.
If there is, we're gonna question it, because the person will eventually be a Medicaid client, but that doesn't solve all the problems, right? We just talked about two programs that they're probably not eligible for in Franklin County. But, if they were here, they might be eligible. But like I said, it is a very unique, we don't even budget for stuff like this. And it is just one of those things that if I were to reference the case, you would all know who it is.
So that was my next question. So if it's not budgeted for, where would this end up in the budget?
Jenny?
Miscellaneous.
It's gonna go under like the other grant funded. So we have other lines, like forensic monitoring falls under other grant funded. So it's just gonna be, I'm gonna increase the budget by $10,000 once you approve this. And then the expenses are gonna offset that. They're gonna go against that
So
line.
the undesignated amount.
The undesignated, correct.
But as a Lucas County resident, he's entitled to levy money, right? I mean, that
Correct.
would be the
And that's
logical
what it would be.
place. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, so it, levy money, yeah. All right. A lot of discussion for $10,000, but
It's important.
it's important.
It's important.
Appreciate everybody's
I move.
question. Pardon?
I move.
Okay, we have a motion, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and second to approve or recommend to the board approval of the motion in the middle of page 22. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. All right, that concludes our that part of the agenda. We're now at open session. We begin with Richard.
Will be brief. County Commissioners started fairly census. One day attended its fifth day and paid $3,500 state. 5 councils in the state of right after the voting. It's part of a agreement with coaches and then at 2 o'clock, they had their regularly scheduled meeting for the county chairman. What they started was first thing over their budget hearing, and the public hearing was an agenda canvas every department that is any type of contract that will come before us today in the probate court, Ohio State Extension Office, and soil and water conservation, and they just give a brief presentation, the county commissioners ask questions, it's live stream, and they scheduled at least 5 meetings between now and November the 19th, in addition to their other meetings. So after they take care of their regular budget hearings, the county commissioners are going to be very busy for the next couple of months. Last week, in council meeting, yes, they did approve the residential facility for 16 max and 2024 for 101. I think it's safe to say the old west specification. Watch this very carefully and report any kind of problems to city council members. The donut shop, if you recall, this is in conflict with the Taylor Code plan, so the plan commission staff are on this one. And the plan commission members, they agree. City council unanimously approved it. It's very well, the plan commission, those listening, city council votes to exact opposite. The graphics, the expression for the record, zone change. They will put the donut shop center. There is going to be daycare center and one of the things commission staff recommends approval. They want to take 45 minutes and do a full copy to the road and the block. See what's going on. See what happens. Ordinary accident was the rest of the week. And all that's happening is going to be ready for raising kids.
Thank you, Richard. Annie?
My name is Annie Nancy. I'm the behavioral health and mental justice coordinator.
Thank you, Annie. If you haven't heard retired Justice Stratton before, she's been a tireless advocate for mental health in the state of Ohio for many, many years, and has continued that after she left the bench, retired from the bench. She was on the Supreme Court for quite some time, so she's a real special advocate and somebody worth listening to. Okay. Anything else from the? Okay, I think we're adjourned. Thank you very much.